Cities put together a few weeks ago, and it's back there if you want a hard copy of it on the round table back there. So I'm Linda Olson, City of Englewood Mayor and District 2. If you want to go this way, just introduce yourself. And if you want to tell us anything that happened last night that you need to get
Sheridan.
off your chest.
Kyle Schlachter, Littleton City Council at large.
Gail Christie, trustee of in Columbine Valley.
Carol Fay, Littleton City Council.
Keith Reister, Littleton Public Works Director.
Maria DeAndre, Director of Public Works, Englewood.
Good morning, Dave Cuesta, Englewood City Council, District 4.
Mark Ralph, City Manager, Littleton.
Vicki Cole, City Council at Large, Littleton.
Rita Russell, City of Englewood, Mayor Pro Tem and at-large council member.
Lorette Barentine, District 3. And I would encourage you all to see this history of Sheridan that Councilman Dave Blackrock that said Englewood was the 6th largest city in 1950, leading Littleton and Sheridan.
Dave Black, Sheridan City Council.
Bobby Mooney, Sheridan City Council.
Devin Granberry, City Manager, Sheridan.
Tara Biter-Fleur, Mayor of Sheridan.
Patrick Driscoll, City Council. Mark Campbell, Sheridan Police.
Doug Stevens, Littleton Police.
John Collins, Englewood Police.
Amy Martinez, Englewood City Council at large.
Eric Keck, City Manager. I was just going to say, I'm disappointed that we weren't invited to Sheridan Sinkhole Festival that happens every other year.
Yeah, you know, we had problem with getting the notices out. So.
I think we own it. It's okay.
Snuck up on us.
Should we be planning on another tonight? Or?
No. Party Cafe, name another beer. Debbie Brinkman, Mayor of Littleton.
Great, thank you. So when the three cities got together, we talked about a couple different things that might be important to all of us and put out this agenda with homelessness being one of the major discussions, and then our great Santa Fe EL update as a second major issue or major thing to discuss. So we wanted to give a chance for all of us to share what's happening in our own communities and what some of the responses are to those experiencing homelessness and our businesses and the community at large. And that's why we have our police representation here. They tend to be the first, along with libraries and other kinds of face-to-face interactions with folks that might have to navigate some of the issues related to homelessness. So we thought we'd just start with a report from each city and what's happening, and then do some sharing of resources and thinking about how do we collaborate and work together. So why don't we start with Littleton, and I know everybody's got a little handout of some sort, so who wants to kick off from Littleton?
I will start. I'm going to look to the mayor.
Do we have a handout?
You do. I think this is really great.
Oh, okay.
From Bemis Library.
Yeah.
Don't you remember doing this, Deb?
Oh, yeah, I forgot.
So I think just a little bit of history here for us, and I realize that Englewood and maybe Sheridan as well may be a little bit in front of us as far as dealing with the issue of homelessness, but we had some very informal conversations here probably like a year ago where we just started to recognize that we're seeing a trend there that we would like to address. And so we started having some conversations about maybe pulling our resources together here within the city of Littleton and trying to understand, quite honestly, what is it that we have? Nobody was really understanding here, certainly in the city, about our resources. One thing led to another. We started talking about maybe the possibility of even a forum that we would look to sponsor in Littleton. Conversations with Arapahoe County. We'll probably talk about this a little more in depth a little bit later, but they are willing to kind of take the lead in maybe a regional discussion with that. So here in the last couple of months, myself and the mayor, we've had some informal meetings with our faith-based community here in Littleton. Honestly, I think they've been pretty engaged in the city of Englewood. And so in fact, we had a meeting here just a couple of weeks ago. So one of the things we asked them is to help us kind of assemble a list of resources. And quite honestly, it was a pretty fascinating conversation listening to them about their involvement in our community. And quite honestly, I wasn't even aware to the depth of their involvement. So it was actually pretty impressive. So what you have in front of you is a sheet that actually our library had put together, and we've been working with this faith-based group here to perhaps update this. So the front page here kind of shows you, the overnight shelters, day shelters, food banks, and after I started looking at this, again, it kind of impressed me. I just had no idea, the depth of resource that we had just in Littleton. On the back side is just some additional resources that aren't necessarily tied to the homeless issue, but this is actually a document that we have at our library that staff actually hands out. So that's kind of a brief introduction about where we've been in Littleton. I know we're going to get into a lot more depth. Mayor, I don't know if you have any comments you want to add to that.
Well, a couple things that have kind of come to point to is the work that Sheridan and Englewood did cleaning along the river, particularly in front of our treatment plant. And so we had a presentation to City Council of that. We had seen it at the South Platte Working Group, and so we had that same presentation brought to council, and it was cool. We had the police chiefs at kind of at a panel with some other resources. I'm talking about what they're seeing down there, kind of the trends, kind of what are patterns that they're identifying, places where there may be a shortage in opportunity for them to enforce kind of guidelines as opposed to laws that we may have out there. What are some things that we could do to help them do their job? We see with our faith-based group, what we're learning a lot from them is that the face of homelessness is very different than just the person who's sleeping under a tree in the park. That there's a whole a much larger world of homelessness. We've talked to our school district. Our school board has shared that the homelessness that they see in the schools and how they are managing to help with that. They're also struggling with resources and stuff with that. So it just has become one of those things that, we're not going to fix this alone. We may not even be able to fix it together, but understanding what we are looking at, understanding what we're dealing with, understanding what we have, what resources we all have. We all have a lot of resources. We don't know what they are. We don't know how they align. We also have limited resources. When we talked to our faith-based group, we said one of the things we wanted them to do was help put together kind of a list too, which they're working on, and ask them, okay, so yeah, tell us what you have, but tell us what you don't have, because that's also going to be important. And there's so many. I met with a citizen yesterday, and she was telling me she's working with the homeless too. And what are you doing with the homeless? And so there's all these little things out there. Everybody wants to help, but I think help is happening, but not largely, because we're still seeing a lot of the problem, and it continues to grow. So I look forward to this. I thank the mayor for putting this together and hearing more from each of the communities.
I don't know if your police folks want to chime in on any of it, what you're seeing, or
so. The library puts this document together. The police department has a document we hand out too, but it's a light rail map, and we just put them on the downtown station heading north and tell them next stop. So, no, we've seen an increase in community complaints, as have our fellow police departments. We're aware of just on the higher visibility of homelessness. We've always had homelessness in our communities, and but it seems to me that there's a much more visible presence now in the last couple of years. Complaints, especially in the public spaces, obviously in the parks. We haven't seen as much of the issues along the river like Englewood had dealt with in a very innovative fashion, but in our parks especially, and we do get a lot of issues there. So our officers spend a lot of time working with folks from All Health Network to also work on longer-term solutions for folks that we come in contact with frequently in our city. And that seems to be a pretty good partnership for us, a little outside the normal just move people along kind of response, try to get longer-term solutions and help folks find whether it's shelter or economic aid, things like that, with some of our private sector partners. And We're having a little bit of success there. It's hit and miss, but that's kind of where we're at right now.
Mayor, if I may just
Yeah, go ahead.
kind of add to that. I think, again, about roughly a year ago, I think talking to people like our chief here, I think it started to catch my attention here that it was rising, kind of the visibility, the number of complaints that we were getting. And, I think, again, not knowing what kind of resources we had, it was something that I felt like we had to kind of raise with our own council here, just about we have an issue here. And part of it is communication with our citizens, obviously, because they're becoming, much more nervous about the issue. And so I think that's why we were trying to figure out, well, what is it we can do about this to educate not only ourselves, but ultimately start to help our citizens understand kind of what's going on in our communities. So I think that's why, talking to the mayor and to our council here, why I wanted to kind of raise this issue and this concept of a forum. I know we're going to come back to that here later, but so that's, I think, a little bit of our history.
Thank you. How about Englewood? I don't know, Manager Keck, if you want to kick us off on this, and I know the chief has some things.
Sure.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead,
Mr. Alpha, what you said was spot on. This time last year when we were doing budget discussions for the city of Englewood, we had a philosophical discussion in regards to getting some help from clinicians, mental health workers, and things like that, and we try to track them down and find them. At the same time, I was invited to a lunch with just several pastors from the community, and boy, did that take off, because they asked for my help. They asked if I needed help in anything, and I said, boy, I could sure use some help with the homeless. And they took it and ran with it, and they have the Change the Trend group now. And it's nice to see that they've all come together to do that. I think we all agree you cannot arrest your way out of this. And so we've tried some different innovative programs and whatnot. Oh,
You're fine.
and but all health is that's a key component for us as well. We get 16 hours a week free of charge from All Health for mental health services, not only to the homeless but also to our community, and I think that's just a fabulous program, which is why I'll be coming to council to try to extend that a little bit. And but we the concern we had is the perception. You have the homeless who are homeless because they choose to be, and those that are homeless by predicament. And so it's a very delicate balance. They have rights just as every other citizen, but the perception from the community is like this is not a good thing. And we've developed a zone policing program, partly because of the homeless situation and to try to get a handle on it. And it's if I could say it's working because our officers who work a zone are dealing with the homeless as well as engaging the businesses in the community. And but at the end of the day, the thing that I keep hearing is that we had that program on the Platte River, and so the folks move out, but where do they go? And that's the key to everything. And it's sustainable housing. And I think as a group, one suggestion I would have is because this isn't a city issue, it's not a regional issue, it's a national issue. And until we get the lawmakers to start throwing some money at sustainable housing, we're going to be moving these folks around, but they have nowhere to go. And I'm thinking to myself, about sustainable housing. It's just like marijuana. If you advertise it, they will come. And so, will you be ready for that onslaught? And that's why I say it's more of a national issue that the politicians really need to address. But if you get these communities coming together, I think you have more pop for your buck, so to speak. And I think that's a direction that ultimately things need to head into. So I talk too much.
Just to add on to that, I think, all of our communities are trying to struggle with this issue and what to do. And I know our charter and Littleton is probably very similar, and maybe even Sheridan doesn't advocate or allow for us or dictate that we provide social services. And so much of what we're struggling with is the necessary resources to provide to our residents, whether they are housed or not. And that's an issue. And so much like Sheridan and Littleton as well, we've been trying to ascertain what's the best thing that the city of Englewood could do, and I know our council has had a couple of study sessions on this topic now. And specifically, the thing that we believe the city should do is not necessarily be the service provider, but a resource clearinghouse, and perhaps the progenitor or the energy behind not-for-profits and others working towards coming up with solutions or actually service provision. So we also are working on a resource guide. You have an example in front of you this morning. We're working with a group called Impact Locally, which is a not-for-profit in Denver that does provide some services here in Englewood. And this is an example of their guide that they have that provides any of a number of resources, from food banks to temporary housing and to job help. And so we're working on that right now as well. And the other thing that I think is something that is unique, we've been talking to the Burns Institute for Homelessness and Poverty at the University of Denver. And one of the persons there, actually the director of that entity, does homelessness assessments. They're not point-in-time studies, but they're basically a little bit deeper than a census, if you will, for your homeless population and demography. They want to find out why the people are homeless and what aspect of homelessness they fall into, whether it's chronic, as Chief Collins mentioned, or temporary because of job or home loss, or is it because they're a veteran and they're homeless, or are they a single mother or single parent that's homeless? So we really want to, I think, understand and get our arms around the issue. I think before we take action, we need to understand what is the depth of the issue and what's driving it. And I think looking at doing a study through them, through the university, might be helpful to provide not only our community, but perhaps yours as well, with necessary data to actually bring in other resources, because grants are going to require you to have some data behind it, some numbers. And so we are looking at trying to get a scope of work put together that potentially could be brought forward for Englewood, but it would be applicable also to Sheridan and Littleton as well, with and looking at an assessment.
Another handout that you have here is the Change the Trend, which is similar to, I think, the faith-based ministries that are popping up in some areas like Littleton and banding together. This is not just faith-based, so there are a number of churches, and this is just a one sheet that they put together last week for for another meeting that we had regarding this with the mayors, managers, and Arapahoe commissioners saw this. So I think one of the things that's helpful about this group is that they really want to be a welcoming group to anyone who wants to be engaged in this. They want to partner. They also, they're not looking necessarily to municipalities to come up with the money. They see themselves somewhat independently and want to do their thing, but they know that if we don't do it better together, that it probably will be in opposition to one another. So another group that just is looking to join, or at least, there's no really joining, it's, people deciding that they're going to work together, is our Hope group, which is on Broadway and has a thrift store and a food bank pantry, and they've just met up with them as well, and so I think they're probably going to be joining in. And they're looking at a number of initiatives around navigation of helping people, very specific individuals that are experiencing homelessness, and creating incentives for them, as well as some accountability groups and pairing them up. So they're both looking very specifically at people that come in their doors and that they see, and keeping track of them and sharing information across the different agencies or organizations so that there's more coordinated care, as well as the bigger issue of how do we engage others, police, other churches, other cities that are neighboring us, because we know there's no boundary on this issue. It doesn't matter where the end of one city is and the beginning of another. So this is a helpful group. I know there are other initiatives with folks trying to do it. Yesterday I was talking to someone out towards Bellevue Park and said, there's all these break-ins in our neighborhood and we know it's homeless people. and I don't know how they think they know it's homeless people, but I think we have some conceptions about people who are homeless and what they do, and I doubt that they're probably just homeless people. It might be a ring of, the police know exactly what kinds of groups are going through areas and breaking into cars. So we have a public perception as well as an educational piece that I think we need to work on to help our citizens understand what's going on and what they can do and what they should be, concerned about and when to call and make sure that, we've got the kind of services provided if they feel unsafe. So, I don't know, there are other folks from Englewood that may have some things you want to chime in with. All right, Sheridan.
Well, it's interesting, and I try and think about this problem a little bit in Sheridan, and I see it in two ways in Sheridan. We have the very visible, what I call chronically homeless along the rivers that create a public health issue that the cities have to deal with, and our handout deals a lot with that. What are the costs associated that the taxpayers have to bear when you have that public health issue that you have to address? And I'll have to ask our chief to talk about that in just a minute. But I think the other thing that's a little bit harder to address, and I kind of call it almost the invisible homeless, it's folks that are characterized homeless, but they're not the folks living down on the river. And in the Sheridan School District, they've done some work, and the latest numbers that I'm aware of from that district is that upwards of 25% of the kids in the district are considered homeless. It means that they do not have a permanent roof over their head. They have a roof, but it might not be their roof. And so they're couch surfing, or they're at grandma's, or they're, in some state of flux. They don't have a home, a permanent home. And I think that is maybe where some more of the resource types of allocation and can be of assistance there. But I see us, we have these two types of issue that we have to address out there. And so turn it over to the chief, and then if anyone on my council has anything to say. But Chief, do you just want to just talk briefly about your experience with that?
Well, first, our Public Works Director handed out this little report. That
he's kind of busy. He was going to be here. But he's a little busy right now.
I'm really sorry.
But he was talking about, the actual cost. I think the cost is more, hits Public Works worse than it's the police department. But, some of the interesting things we found is that a lot of the people that we have along the river are, when you talk to them, they're actually homeless by choice. They don't want to be in a home. Mm-hmm. And I didn't realize this, but I talked to one guy, and he actually travels around the country depending upon the weather. So for the summer, he's in Sheridan. In the winter, he goes to Seattle. I don't know why in Seattle, but it's interesting when you talk to these guys. He's actually on disability. He gets his checks direct deposited, and he said he can go to almost any city in the country and go get money out of a bank. So he just travels around based on the weather, and there's a group of people that he's associated with that he knows, and they all travel around. So you have that kind of group that I think is homeless by choice, but they do have what I would call a lower source of income because they're on disability or something like that. But the bigger issue, for us along the river is most of our complaints aren't from folks using the river. It's actually from the golf course. And the camps, before they went in and did their, I think he calls it mastication, where they went in and cut all the brush, these people would pop up and harass the golfers. And, a lot of the people that do that, they're not criminals by definition, but they have mental health issues. So they kind of act out because when they camp there and they set up their little camps, I forgot, I think it's on the 8th holes where they had their camp, there was like 8 or 9 people living there. And they kind of view that you're in their backyard, even though you're on the golf course. So we've dealt with that, and as Randy pointed out in his paper here, what we'll do if we find an organized camp, with the city attorney's advice, we give them a regular 72-hour eviction notice, just like it was their home.
Of what did you call it?
72-hour eviction notice.
Eviction.
It's like we're evicting them from the home because we know our city boundaries and what's part of the public infrastructure, and we give them the time to move, and then we tell them if you don't move your stuff, we will take it, we'll store it for a period of time, and you can come get it. As of now, I don't believe anybody's ever come and got their stuff. The only guy that came and got anything was we took a handgun, and he came and wanted that back. So we had to give that back to him. But as far as the stuff we collect, I don't think anybody's come back to get their stuff. Then we do have one church that does a food bank drive and does that every week, but normally that's catered to more of a family unit that's struggling, that actually might have an apartment under Section 8 but needs help with food. That's kind of who they deal with. And the interesting thing, I think Devin mentioned about the couch surfing, we do get a lot of domestics in the city that are actually the result of some type of disagreement over a temporary housing situation. So, for example, someone lets someone move in and stay a few days because they're homeless, and then it gets to be too much and they want them out. And then there's some type of domestic disturbance or some type of fight. So we get a lot of that type of stuff. But what we found is that, if we just we don't really bother them unless we get complaints, because I agree with, I think, what the mayor said earlier. A lot of these folks are homeless. They're not criminals, by definition. And I don't think, at a great extent, other than some scrapping stuff and that kind of stuff, they're not the people breaking into our cars and doing burglaries per se. Most of the time, if we get a burglary involves a homeless person, they're looking for a place to crash. And we get a few of our apartments where someone will end up in jail for 30 days on some type of violation. His friends who are semi-homeless find out, they'll break in and live there. Then that person gets out of jail, and then we have some type of police action. So normally, the complaints, like I said, are really from the golf course and that type of thing. And we do have some organized camps. I think, Englewood and Sheridan, along with the urban drainage people, went in there and cleaned out all that brush. And that kind of eliminates their hiding place. But, we get all sorts of odd stuff. We had one guy that we dealt with that really never gave us any trouble until Denver showed up looking for him on a homicide. And then I think he's the same guy that did your homicide. And, he is a criminal, and DPD thinks he's linked to several homeless homicides across the country. So essentially, he's a serial killer. So you have every range from people who are homeless by choice, people who have a desperate situation and are homeless temporarily, to criminals who just kind of travel the country. So that's pretty much all I have, unless you guys have any questions.
Do you have any unsolved homicides?
In the city of Sheridan? Yes, we do.
Well, you said that he didn't give you any trouble until they went looking for him.
No, he didn't commit any homicides in our city. So he's homeless, but lived in our city in the ditch.
It's just kind of a mixed message, I guess, a little bit to...
Well,
we're trying to wrap our heads around a little bit.
Yeah, I'm just trying
not
to
characterize just because somebody's homeless that they're not a criminal. Being homeless isn't.
No, I stated that earlier. I said that most folks are not criminal, but I'm pointing out that we deal with a whole range. So, like I said earlier, most of the folks we deal with are not criminals. However, I gave an example of where we did have a homeless person who never gave our officers any issues. We had contact with him on a regular basis. However, he did go across our jurisdiction to Denver and kill a guy, and then he committed a homicide in Anchorage. And they tied him to a homicide, I believe, in Louisiana.
Those are the kind of things that the community, they're concerned about, because that person still presents a danger for whenever they end up deciding to do something in Sheridan or again in Englewood. So I think that's why they want just that due diligence of following up when people are maybe not committing awesome, crimes at the time, but for the loitering and trespassing, being on people's property or in their garages.
And I think the public,
petty theft.
I think most people in your community, I think when you talk to the public, that they actually have a perception that most homeless people are criminals, and that's really not the case. But I think that is the public perception.
And for what you had brought up was the 25% of, and we got a similar stat from Councilmember Martinez, and I sit on the school liaison for Englewood School. We have 5 school districts in our city, but for the Englewood School District, and theirs is similar. But they go by the federal standard, and the federal standard is anybody who does not hold a lease or a mortgage is considered homeless. And that's in this day and age of so many people who have families and who are not married, goes way beyond just couch surfing. That identifies a woman and her children. She moves in with somebody, and it could be a very long-term relationship. I suppose everything's somewhat temporary in our lives to some extent, but it's a little hard to wrap your head around exactly how many of those people are looking at people that maybe stay in a hotel or really are the kind of couch surfing piece of it, because the standard is really so high that just because a woman lives with her significant other and they hold the lease or the mortgage to that house, technically by federal standards and what the school does, that makes them homeless.
Right.
So we do have to make sure that we're careful on dealing with that compared to the people that we see on the street, like.
Sure, I think it goes to speaking towards the entire issue and having an understanding that it's not just the folks camping at the river. And the school districts look at this, as you guys are aware, as an issue of stability. How does a child learn? A child learns best when they have a stable environment to learn in. So that is the effect and that's why the school districts are even considering looking at that.
And I think that figure.
The school district, the woman who's living with her boyfriend for 8-10 years, those children have a stable environment. I've had
sure, and it's not perfect.
I don't hold that
right.
mortgage or lease. It's not that their children don't have a stable environment, so we want to make sure that we're kind of vetting those people out from that situation because people have made a life choice. I apologize.
That's okay. I was going to say, I think that figure to us, to me, it instinctually makes sense if you look at the income level in Sheridan and the cost of living in the metro area. It makes sense that a good portion of our people are struggling to have a home, given what they're earning.
I would echo that. I think in Littleton, when we talked to our school board, it was pretty clear that they weren't operating off just some random statistical thing with some random methodology. They were speaking to us about what they are seeing and the communication that they're having, and they are able to identify these people because they've created a safe place for there to be conversation with these folks, because they don't have, what is your mailing address? They need to have these contact information, and sometimes with it being temporary or whatever, so they're able to identify this and then able to help these children when they come in who may not have had a proper, change of clothes or whatever, and push them through or put them through kind of a get ready for school, before school program, so that then when they integrate into the classrooms, they don't look different, they don't feel different, they feel like part of it. So the schools really do reach out, I think, as a credit to our school districts, because we all have great school districts, to really determine on an individual basis where things are, and not just, assuming statistical. So
I think this demonstrates, even the questions that Councilmember Barentine is raising of just the different views people have about people who are considered either homeless or on the edge, and that the data points, I was trying to pull up the point-in-time study that just came out, and Arapahoe County has some data with it, but it's just such a thin veneer of a look at what really is happening. That's why I think we need to do some better data mining to figure out what are the groups, what percentage are chronic. We know that from some of the point in study, but that's just one point in study. It's in January. It's one day out of the year. But our schools could be very helpful, and our libraries, our police, the faith-based groups that are interacting to probably give a better picture. There are some groups of people, such as veterans, who have services that we're just unaware of, but could actually eradicate homelessness amongst veterans if we can simply access those resources. So I know that Columbine Valley is here partly to listen, but did you have a report you wanted to add in?
I would mention two things, Mayor. Columbine Valley is 100% residential. We have no commercial properties. We do have a golf course, but our relationship to the homeless primarily occurs for homeless people who are on their way. For instance, there's a food bank called Open Arms Food Bank, which is west of us on Coal Mine Road, and we find homeless people are on their way there to be fed, and they find shelter on our golf course and in that vicinity. That's about the only kind of problem we've been having. is where homeless people are on their way someplace to be fed or clothed. I'd also like to speak, though. I'm a member of Mission Hills Church, and Mission Hills, you'll notice in the area resources, have been involved in food and clothing, a food bank and clothing bank for probably 30 years. And we have purchased property in Littleton on Ventura Street, and we have the Life Center, Littleton Life Center there. I just mentioned very quickly that the Life Center provides a food bank, GED classes, language classes, legal aid, senior connections, and then we have the severe weather shelter. And so we have a lot of people coming and going to our Life Center. And in doing so, we find and we get complaints from our library, which is half a block away, and a museum, and a large park. And so, again, coming and going to receive those services, they find places to stay. And so that's where our, as a Mission Hills Church member, that's where we get our complaints.
Go ahead. Just
you have I thought that property was owned by the Littleton Housing Authority, or the Littleton Housing Authority. Was that's purchased?
It's a different property. We're in that vicinity, but we bought that property 5 or 6 years ago.
Because in the movement of people from one area to the other, what changed the trend, and your organization is involved in that, purposely stages people in Englewood to bring to a facility via bus in Littleton. And in talking to some people at the Methodist Church there, where they are then housed during the severe weather, they said it's set up that way because we don't want the homeless in our neighborhood. And I believe these are good people. They're good people, but they were telling the truth in that once they're done spending the night, they're bused back to Englewood so that they're not congregating in the communities in Littleton. And while that might be a little easier for Littleton to deal with, it is not for the 4300 block of Englewood, where they have to congregate in order to get service, and where they are dropped off again the next day at 7 o'clock. That puts a burden on that area, those residences, because they want to stay around that area. Mission, your church has people, living in the window wells, and that is a bit of a danger to both the other residences, but it's not a kindness to them either, because then they don't really have anywhere to go during the day. So I hope that we can come up with some other alternatives so that we're all working together, but not burdening one community at the expense for the benefit of another. And I know that church feels really good about what they do, but then they're also trying to protect their community and putting an additional burden on my district and my residents. So I hope we can come to some other conversations that are a little more safe and helpful for the homeless and for the residents who are in those areas as well, because it is not a kindness to the homeless to do that.
Councilmember Barentine, that is what this meeting is about, is to try and come up with some of the different approaches. So go ahead, Mr. Black.
I noticed our city manager, Granberry, was mentioning that the majority, or a lot of the homeless are not campers. And that's where I went to one conference in Sheridan. The largest part of the homeless live out of their vehicles. Mm-hmm. I've known a couple of them. My friend Marina, she's been doing it for years, and she works.
Yeah.
She'll, whatever, she's willing to do anything. She'll scrap, she'll flag, whatever she can do. But she lives out of her car, and one of the main reasons there is how can you not live out of your car from making 1981 wages and trying to pay 2018 rent? Right. And as far as the motels go, that's another option perhaps. They say once you get in a motel, you never get out. And all three of our cities have motels. Littleton and Englewood and Sheridan, we all have such type of motels. And so what do you do about that? As far as the mental health issue goes, I can sort of imagine that if life is going on well for you, and all of a sudden you're homeless, that's going to mess up your mind. I can see how that might happen. I can see how that could be a real contributing factor to that. And so maybe a lot of them they're not mentally ill by choice either.
Right.
Yeah. Good point.
Councilmember.
Just an observation, the better we are at providing services, the more we attract people because the word gets out. And I'm not saying we shouldn't provide. We have a catch-22, and it's complicated because we have the light rail system, and the word gets out that way, and we attract more. So it's something, I mean, we want to be addressing this, but in a sense, we're fueling the problem. It just is what it is, and we have to, in my view, keep responding. One of the problems during the day is the people who do come to the library, and citizens, better or worse, particularly with the children that come in the programs, are anxious because the people are there because they don't understand, you know. And so just because you're homeless, as we said, doesn't mean you're a threat. But they're there, they come in, they use the bathrooms. Some of them actually come close to taking a bath in the bathroom because it's there and they can get clean, right? But they don't get clean clothes there, so then people see them and then they get anxious. So it's something we're going to be churning as we indeed try to provide even more service.
I think you're spot on. I think that's the reason why we need to coordinate with one another, because if you're just giving food, I mean, people need to be fed, right? You don't want people to go hungry, but to have some sort of process, a navigation process of becoming housed and finding stability. And if there's no accountability, if the organizations are not communicating with one another, for those that are not chronically choosing, there's a huge population that isn't. And how do we help them transition into housing that's stable? And then I think, Mr. Black, you're exactly right, the kind of mental health that brings when you are unstable with your housing, an inability to take care of yourself, even health-wise, not mental, but physically. You know, sleeping in a car every night with families is not a great thing either. So, but I think if these organizations are talking to one another, then they know who's been served today, and are we holding them accountable to taking those next steps of getting out of homelessness, and how do we help them then with the services and contacts for transitional homes, different kinds of services to help them get a better paying job. It's just a whole slew of things, and it's not, I mean, I wish it was just one answer. We'd be solving it if it was, but criminalizing it doesn't help either. We'd be filled with our jails, yeah.
Well, and to your point, I think that I've heard a number of things here, and some factual things, and then some opinion that is based on things we've heard, or things we believe, or things we, kind of assume. And so, you had mentioned doing the working on with this DU group, I think, with the study.
Yeah, Eric has been in contact with them, and along with the Change the Trend folks.
Yeah, I'd like to think about if doing it as a Tri-City study, if that would be possible, simply because I think that we really need to have a database. We need to understand what we're talking about, and this isn't about a count. This isn't about a census of the homeless. This is more about who they are, why they're there, what kind of the root of it, which is if we don't get to the root, then we're never going to be able to figure out how we can support and how we can help. So I would strongly support a little bit more shared information on that. I'm assuming there's a cost involved. There's some sort of time frame involved. There may be a need for us to form maybe a subgroup or some such thing to help with that. But I think that that's a really good place to start, so that we're not all just speculating or, I heard, I saw, someone told me.
It's very anecdotal.
Yeah.
And it might be nice to have a common data set if we're going to have that summit later this year.
Yeah.
Right.
That might be a good place to then introduce that data.
Yeah.
All of that group.
Yeah, for those of you that don't know, we had this meeting on Friday with the mayors, managers, and Arapahoe County commissioners about they want to have a summit of some sort that Nancy Jackson has been pulling together, Commissioner Jackson. Are we talking about having that be our forum? Is that what you're suggesting here, and just make it one big forum, or are you also suggesting doing something that's Tri-Cities? It seems like
forum.
Are you talking about there's a summit and a forum? We're talking about two different things?
I'm not really. Well, I guess I'm not thinking forum. I mean, Arapahoe County is
the
going
wrong
to
word.
Oh, Devin.
That's all right.
But Arapahoe County, I think Nancy's trying to. It's formulating, so it's not clear yet exactly. But there's some work being done, and I think that she's asking for representatives from each of our. I know Mark. I think Mark's Sama.
Yeah.
I
can comment on that.
Showing up. But I was thinking more. I mean. Quite honestly, whatever Arapahoe County does is what Arapahoe County's going to do. I mean, at the end of the day, we all know that if we're going to get something done in our communities, we're going to do it. Mm-hmm. And so I would, this group has always been really good at getting things done, making things move. We work together. People listen when 3 cities come and say we are working as a unified group. And getting this data and what that data looks like, and then maybe reconvening us as we process through that and start to... And we had talked about even potentially putting together a smaller group of us that would kind of kind of an ad hoc task force that would kind of carry that work through, and then when we bring back together again, how often do we want to do that? But I don't think I would look for a forum at this
So we're talking about a separate thing. That's what I thought too.
Yeah.
I just wanted to make sure because the word summit and forum have been thrown around. So are you going to add on the...
Yeah, if I may. I think... I've had a few conversations with Commissioner Jackson just about their intent. And I think they were hearing largely from me just about how Littleton wanted to have a forum. And in fact, I visited with our 2 other managers here about that. I would like to support Commissioner Jackson. I think she's trying to put something together here late fall. October is kind of roughly what I'm hearing. I think we all recognize that her forum isn't going to be the first and only opportunity for the region to get together. In fact, I don't even know if it perhaps it should go beyond Arapahoe County, but I think it's her attempt to try to pull people together. There's a lot of things going on in Aurora. They've been obviously in front of this for a lot longer than any of us. And so I think her hope was to kind of bring all of the municipalities together, and others, quite honestly, not just the cities, and have a little bit broader conversation. With that said, though, I don't believe necessarily that that's going to target our issues. We are unique, the 3 cities, because we share the river. And so we have the river adjacent to Denver. Aurora's got their own challenge. It's different there. So I would support personally the 3 cities looking at some way for us to communicate and share resources and talk about our own problem here. Add to perhaps what the county is trying to accomplish. Obviously, the county's got all sorts of human services. That's largely well, maybe I won't say it that way. That is their mission to a large extent, is human services. So obviously, they need to be part of this conversation, and how we interface with them is important. We don't want to duplicate anything. That's obviously wasteful. And so I think there is a definite need for us to interface with them at some level.
Mayor Pro Tem Russell.
Just on that, it's probably been about 4 months ago or so that I went to the anniversary of the Action Center, which was formed back in the 60s to help the homeless, and they have a target. And I actually happened to be sitting at a table, and one of the Jefferson County commissioners was there. It was a fundraising event. And so after the meeting, I just turned to him and asked him about the commissioners and their support of the Action Center. And he goes, I wish we had more resources to give to the Action Center. The truth is the county has resources that we as cities do not. And I think it is imperative that we get the counties involved because without them, we will not be able to get anything done.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Agreed.
So and part of it is figuring out what we need and where our gaps are. I think your question to the faith-based communities is great to say, well, what do you not have, and what do you? Because that's where sometimes the county can help to step in. But, So can we agree that we want to do some kind of an organized Tri-City forum of some sort, and then also support I think she's calling it a summit, maybe, the homeless summit, and then have some kind of group. I think you were recommending mayor, managers, chief of police meeting, maybe monthly in kind of an ad hoc time. I don't know what the end of this would be. The end of time, probably, to solve this, as Councilmember Cole has reminded us. This is going to go on for a while. And are there other ideas? I think our business community has to be at the table with this. They really do. They're the ones that have to deal with those who are loitering, those who might be seeking warmth in their buildings during the winter months. And that's where we've had our challenges. 4300 block is one of them. There are others as well. Some who are taking action and joining in with Change the Trend and trying to figure it out. For us, I just think there's different needs from the business community. We need to get them engaged.
And the school, each of
and
our
then the
school boards.
All right, so maybe the mayors and managers can take this to the next steps and report back to you on anything regarding any kind of study, any kind of relationship with the county, and figure out what a forum would even look like, and maybe propose back to councils, does this look like this would work for us? And the police, of course, need to be strongly at the table too. I don't know if I said that. They're the really actually frontline folks day in, day out, along with the schools. The next topic was a Santa Fe Pell, how do you say it, update?
Yep.
Unlike Pell Grants.
Yep.
I was a great Pell kid, very proud of it.
That's me?
That's you, Pete.
Actually, Marie and I were over here during the last discussion, and the comment about choosing to be mentally ill. Normally, if you choose to be mentally ill, your career of choice is public works management. generally what we know. So we wanted to give a few minutes, because I know there's been a lot of discussion over the last year or so related to a PEL. And a PEL, again, stands for Planning and Environmental Linkages Study. Kind of the way this works in the hierarchy of things is when you go build something on a major transportation corridor, you have to go through the NEPA process, the National Environmental Policy Act. And there's, that's a full-blown environmental impact statement and those things. And so there's stages below that. The PEL a few years ago we used just to refer to as NEPA Light within our business. And so what a PEL does is it takes a look at a corridor and brings in all of the factors that may be impacting that transportation corridor currently and in the future. It's not just environmental factors, it's economic factors, it's social justice factors, it's all those types of things are in it. And so a study like that is necessary, first of all, to understand what you need to do with a corridor and the potential that it has. And also, without that stage, you do not have access to federal money, because you can't get into you got to go through the NEPA process to be able to access that federal money for large projects. So that's why US 85 through this corridor is kind of on the top of this list. It's an interesting corridor in the sense that there are 4 counties that impact it due to transportation. There are 3 city jurisdictions along it. It's also split between 2 planning districts within CDOT and 2 operational districts within CDOT. So we've been meeting as a group to kind of push that forward. When I say group, there's 3 of us here that are here in the group, Devin and our peers from around the area. And so we're in the process right now of going and developing the TIP projects, the Transportation Improvement Program, for the next 4 years of federal funding. And so as part of that discussion, we've been trying to frame this. And so behind the scenes, there's a few of us that have been very active in working with CDOT, with Federal Highway Administration, those kind of things to kind of put a box around this thing so we know what it's going to look like. And the current discussion involves the 4 counties being Douglas, Arapahoe, Jeffco, and Denver. And the corridor study would most likely be from about 470 to I-25. There's still some discussion on the north terminus for a few reasons with Denver, but that still has to be worked out. Looking at the necessity of what's going to go on there, a study of this nature is probably going to be in the neighborhood of $3 million based on that. Part of the reason why we've done a lot of work with federal highways already is because those of us that have done projects like this, myself, Maria, Brian Weimer from the county, We've been involved in projects that are driven by other organizations that have scope creep in these projects, and we're doing everything we can to not do that. When I was involved in the North I-25 EIS, it started at 13 and finished at 21 million. To give you a sense of how you can have scope creep. I won't indicate which jurisdiction drove that, but there was one in particular. So, so basically what we've been trying to do is in preparing for the TIP cycle. In this year's TIP cycle, there's really a change in the process. You may or may not know, and there's going to be a regional pot in each sub-planning area and then a sub-regional pot with about 20% of the money in the regional pot. And so what we've collectively discussed is that the top project coming out of this region for the regional pot, which is only $21 million. I know we sit here and say only 21, but which is really not a lot of money. You really can't build much for that, to be honest with you, on a big corridor. So this PL is at the top of that list. And so in a situation like that, if it went in at $3 million, you can get about 1.5. And a project in that regional pot is going to be a 50% match. And so as we've gone through jurisdictional discussions for that other 1.5, the way we've broken that out up till now is a situation where we've got, let me pull my notes up here and put my glasses on. So we've theoretically we've gone through a lot of different funding scenarios. None of this is settled on, but we felt it was important for two reasons. We have to submit a project later in really about August 31st. And also every one of us is in our budgeting process, which makes it very relevant. So of the remaining 1.5, we're looking at three of the four counties contributing $150,000 each. Jeffco kicking in 50, since they're really the most remote. And then we'd be looking for CDOT to bring $750,000 to the table, leaving the remaining three of us on the corridor based on frontage would leave Littleton at about 160, Englewood at about 52, and Sheridan at about 41 collectively. Now, I don't know, we still don't have commitments from CDOT. You know, we're sort of in this chicken and egg situation where all the local jurisdictions are sitting around. I know I hear this from the other city managers, is we're not going to commit money unless CDOT commits money. And CDOT will say, well, we're not going to commit money unless the locals commit money. So we're kind of in this moment like that. But we feel very comfortable this is really raised up in the priority level of CDOT's targeted work. And so we know this is very high on their radar screen as well. We're in the process of getting concurrence for the TIP with them. More than likely, the project will be submitted by Arapahoe County. We've also really tried to put CDOT in a headlock and convince them that we should have a pairing of a couple of the local jurisdictions run the project, because the overhead take for CDOT for a study or design project is 11%. And it is now 24% for construction. So that's a pretty good number. So in this case, we're talking about 11, and 11%, let's round it to 10. We're talking about $350,000 there. And so $350,000 could allow us to, do some other things. So what we've done at the staff level is we've kind of had each jurisdiction put up a list of the top 4 or 5 things they want out of the study. To make sure that we've got that in the framework. Things that are rising to the top of the list are, operational improvements and capacity improvements. We've also talked about one overall manager for the corridor versus 4 right now. We ran into this just yesterday with a discussion with CDOT about who has to replace cameras on Santa Fe for traffic control. So, that efficiency level would be important, and so that's all part of the discussion. We also brought into the discussion things like economic development, redevelopment of properties. There's very limited greenfield along the corridor, so it would really be redevelopment. How do the interchanges work and those kind of things. So, $3 million sounds like a lot, but when we talk about something like Mineral in Santa Fe, which I was looking at the traffic ratios, and we have these traffic nerdy kind of things that we do. But generally speaking, at rush peak hour, with no accidents and nothing, it will take you an extra 10 minutes just to get through that particular intersection because of the load. That interchange was designed for 30,000 vehicles a day, and there's 90,000 a day right now. And a solution to that is probably in the $70 to $90 million range because of the constraints that are there. You got railroads, we joke that the only thing that they could throw in would be a ditch company right through the middle of the intersection. It's the only thing we're missing right there.
Known as the Denver Water Company.
Yeah. No, Englewood's running their ditch through there sometimes too. The property just to the west of that.
Thanks, Keith.
Yes, Englewood is as part of our development review process, we must consider their ditch.
Thank
But
you.
it's not a sinkhole yet. So.
Yeah. It might be this morning. It may run through the day. Very possible. We did have a little overtop on one ditch last night, so maybe part of that. So the process for us now is we continue to work at the staff level. We feel really comfortable that we're pretty close to getting a box around the scope of this thing that won't create scope creep, but will also present opportunities for all of us to meet our needs, and then push this into the process. One of the other alternatives we're still kind of pushing in the background is we would love to be able to actually have that first 1.5 come out of CDOT current money versus federal tip money. The federalization makes some differences, but the reason we're talking about that is if we can do that, then we can push that, say, 1.5 million down the road to, say, years 3 and 4 in the TIP process, which would be basically 23, 24, so that the PEL gets done. Then you can use some of that money to move into the NEPA process for some of the highly ranked projects and kind of issues that come out of that. Because you need to go through that NEPA to then go chase the federal money. And the way the process works as well is unless there's a commitment of construction money on the far end, you're not going to start the NEPA process. So there's this kind of path along the way. So we're trying to do sort of we're looking at, 6, 7, 10-year planning horizon as we try and scope out this individual project. So that's kind of where we're at. Everybody's been at the table. Everybody's been very engaged. You have a well-coalesced coalition for the corridor. Everybody is, really on the same page. Everybody has some different needs, but I think we're going to be in a really good place here very shortly. So, Maria or Devin, you've sat in on enough of these meetings at this point. So,
I would just add why a PEL versus starting with the NEPA right away. And FHWA has now decided within probably the last 5 years that unless you have committed funds for construction, you can't go into the NEPA process. So you start with a PEL to identify kind of those broad range issues with the idea that we come out of this with recommendations for priorities, as Keith said. That way, then, with those priorities, then you go into the environmental specifically and clear from an environmental standpoint those elements that are prioritized in order to get the federal funds. So.
Yeah, and so as an example of how this plays out, I'll give you an example sort of on South Santa Fe right now. So most of you probably know where the launch ramp comes off and goes to 470 East. So we take that little stretch right there, and there's a few thousand feet between Mineral and the launch ramp. Call it the launch ramp. This is what it seems like. It looks like something in the monorail at Disney World. So last year, about a year ago, CDOT was out there doing some paving, and if you noticed, they stopped part way, which to everyone else in the world is like, what are you doing? Well, they found out partway through the project that half of Santa Fe in that section, they theoretically don't have access to. It's on the railroad's property. It's been like that for decades. The railroad hasn't gone out there and shut it down, but they stopped to get through the right-of-way process, which initially they thought was going to take 36 months because it's a statewide issue. So we got them to accelerate that. So they went back out there and paved, and as part of that, we recommended a small change in the striping for the capacity lanes. Because it got to 1,800 feet, depending on where you measured it, that would kick it into the environmental review of CDOT. Because you can't add capacity without an environmental review. So that kind of kicked in. We also, right in that area, Woolhurst Landing is a social justice area. Because as we just spent talking about affordable housing, all of those areas are in the affordable housing envelope. So we were able to remeasure for CDOT so that they were able to add the capacity in there. And, so those are the kind of things that come up through the process. And it seems a little bit nonsensical at times, like 2,000 feet. The reality of the situation is historically in the United States, and why social justice is important is we go and widen roads in the middle of low-income areas. We put landfills and those kind of things in low-income areas. And so this is part of the process has been added to allow for consideration of those things during the process. And that's why when you're talking about adding capacity or those kind of things, that's when those things step in. It's under environmental, but it's really social justice issues that are driving that.
That's the trailer community?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. Most mobile home communities fall into the affordable housing category today. And so that's always considered when you're talking about, especially a federalized project. So.
Does CDOT do the planning? Do they have staff do the planning, or do they contract it?
Usually what happens is whether we were doing it or not, it would be the same thing. We would be the program administrator. In other words, the one running the project, and we would put that out in RFP on the street. There's a large number of firms. I mean, right in our own organization, we've got HDR, FHU, Benish, all doing projects right now along the same line. So that's how it would typically work. So.
And we will push very hard to not do the 11% overhead, because we do have on both the county and the cities, we have experience running projects like this. So we don't really see the benefit of CDOT oversight at a cost of 11%.
No, exactly.
They are resistant to that change at this point in time. So, that's why headlock was sort of an appropriate term.
Thanks for your work on that. So all three cities are these going to show up in our budgets then?
Yes.
So we're going to see this, and this is great background.
Englewood said you're going to put up the first 1.5.
Right.
Thanks for that. You can't always be first on mine.
That's right.
We're good for it. Go ahead. We're good.
Sure.
Well, good. Well, we're done with the agenda as we had planned. Is there anything that anyone wants to update us on from any of your communities?
I would like to apologize to my colleague in Sheridan. Councilmember Black last week asked me to go and check over by Natchez Court, the road on Oxford, and I did go over there, and there were some other distractions going on for me, and I was trying to figure out which side, because he was concerned that there was a bit of a dip there, and I, at this point, obviously wish I had brought it forward to our Public Works people. So I apologize, but you have a very diligent council member over in Sheridan, and he did bring it to my attention, and I did say that there was a bit of a concave, but I wasn't sure that it was on the same side of the road, and I'm sorry that I didn't bring it up. I'm not sure that there was a lot we could have done at that time to do that, but I do appreciate, and we all need to just be cognizant when we see things to see it and report it, at least to the Public Works Department. So
you're accepting blame for the sinkhole. Got that.
Any other?
Oh, I said, so you're accepting blame for the sinkhole?
It is our property. Yeah. It was our problem.
Personal blame.
No, personal blame.
It was our problem when it happened the first time. So a couple of years ago, when I actually was doing some stuff with Sheridan, so it is still our responsibility.
Councilmember Cole?
Yeah, so this is not official city sponsored, but we have Western Welcome Week coming up, and anybody who wants flyers, I didn't bring extra with me, but you can get the information online. But come, please, particularly on parade day, and stay afterward, and then throw balls at the police dunk tank, because the chief is going to be one of the volunteer donkeys. So,
donkey.
Donkey.
As opposed to a
Donkey or donkey?
Well, on that note, I'll say tomorrow night It is tomorrow's Thursday. Is our last Sounds of Summer down here in the wonderful little pavilion area. And Face, if you're an a cappella,
Oh, they're great.
They're coming. So it's a men's a cappella group, which is nationally known. I think it's at 6:30. Is that right?
6:30.
Yeah. So come, bring your lawn chair, come enjoy, and hopefully it won't rain like it did last night. Anything else from anyone? Yeah, go ahead.
Some of you are probably aware we had a recent event where someone completely not within our community decided to launch a pretty massive social media campaign to put a bunch of tubers on the river. And it had, at the point that we actually saw it, and it was something like 35,000 interested, and there were about 4,000 that were coming. And put in up at C470 and tube down the river. And so this happened apparently last year, and nobody knew about it, and it happened. I heard it from a business along the river. They all got out at his business and just overwhelmed it. A bunch of inebriated, various stages of dress, and just overtook his restaurant. And he asked me, could you please see that might not happen again this year? I'm like, what the heck happened last year? So we met with South Suburban, and we started talking about, because we have an opportunity to manage the city manager can actually close the river in Littleton. And it's something pretty severe. We don't really like doing it. We've had to do it for a couple of emergencies. But what this kind of did, I mentioned it to Mayor Olson about that we were doing it, and she goes, do you think they're going to all come down to River Run? I'm like, I don't know. They might.
Well, you were stopping them, so.
Yeah, but they get in their cars and come down and use you as a trailhead. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be working with South Suburban on some ways that we can put some better management on that. We do have a permit process. This guy was told, you didn't permit it, and even if he tried to permit it, we wouldn't do it. It's too big. Chief has... we put a couple guys out there to keep people away, and there was absolutely nobody that showed up because we got pretty good media coverage that we closed the river. But it also sends a message, so we need to have a very good, stronger policy in place so that we can, again, like we were talking, you can't enforce something that you haven't created a policy around. So I think that's something that we want to keep you guys involved in and engaged in, just because what we do upstream has an effect downstream. And so if we keep them off of there, then what could be, they could come in down closer to you. So I don't know how persistent these people are, but they certainly don't have any perception. This is not Boulder Creek. This is not, those two big creeks that.
There's not enough water to be doing.
Oh, and that was the thing. There was about 2 inches of water in the river at the time. So it was environmental, and it was safety, and it was just trying to stop stupid too. So I wanted to just kind of loop everybody in that's kind of where that's at, and we will continue to work on that and keep you guys engaged and informed on what we do there, because I think it does have an effect on everybody else.
Yeah, thank you.
Great. Well, thank you for everyone. To everyone, and there's more food. If you want to grab some Duffy rolls or other things, please do. Who's up next to be hosting? Does anybody know?
It's probably Littleton.
Is it Littleton or?
Sorry, what?
Who's next for hosting?
Yeah, I think it's Littleton.
I think it is, because I think we did it. Yeah. I think
So we'll wait to hear from Littleton as to the next, but we'll be updating you on the homeless initiatives, and then PEL will hopefully finalize that, and that'll be a great thing we accomplish together.
Yeah.